Give me a minute and we'll talk about Avdiivka. In the Avdiivka direction, it is now reported that there are as many as 40,000 Russian troops getting ready for a large-scale assault on the chemical plant in the north, just south of the Tarakan, which we'll talk about just a second. On the southern axis of Avdiivka, you can see the Russians are pushing, but they are not making any gains. And in spite of things like continuous night assaults, now it's important to remember the Russians don't actually have much in the way of night vision, not compared to the Ukrainians. And the results, as we can see, are just devastating. But that's nothing compared to the results up north. And here's why. Now, it's not easy to tell here because the picture is so small and we don't have a good 3D view, but this is what you have to think about when you think about the Tarakan. The Tarakan is that giant slag heap, right? 80 feet tall. What is that, about 25 meters, right? And here's what's important. It sits right at the brink of the lowland. And so east, where the Russians are coming from, the ground sits another 60, 80 meters lower than the base of the Tarakan. But on the Tarakan itself and on the west side, the ground is at a near par or just maybe 20 meters lower than the Tarakan itself. And that means that while it's a height advantage, if your enemy is coming from the east, it is not any advantage if your enemy is to the west. And so I got a lot of flack when I said that the Tarakan had fallen, but it didn't make much difference because all the trolls were saying in the comments, no, the Russians have just captured the heights. Now the Ukrainians are dead in the water. Nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth, and here's why. 700 meters south of the Tarakan is that chemical plant. Now here's a picture taken from the top of the Tarakan. Do you notice what's higher than the Tarakan? The chemical plant behind it. So what do the Ukrainians do? They carry machine guns up to the roof. ATGMs, javelins, Stinger, whatever, right? Man pads. They carry them up to the roof. That's where they're firing from. And the practical implication of this is, if we go back to the picture of the Tarakan, let me show you. Actually, this is a better picture because it shows you the ground that the Russians have to cover as they approach the Ukrainians. It's just open, flat ground. They're sitting ducks out there, especially with the Ukrainians up on top of the building the way that they are. The practical upshot of this is, according to the Ukrainian MOD, the Russians have been losing about 500 men a day. Of every 100 men that try to storm the Ukrainian positions across these open fields, 80 don't make it. Now, that's not to say that the 20 that make it aren't a real threat to the Ukrainians in their positions. They are. They absolutely are. They just managed to get across this field. They're going to want to survive. And so they're going to fight for their lives. And they do. They do. The reality is, back here at the Tarakan, do you see those two open flat fields north of the Tarakan? It took the Russians about a month to capture them, losing about 500 men a day. Now, you do the math on that. Is it any wonder that they've assembled a force of, by all reports, 40,000 men to try to storm this position? And it's important to take it tactically Because if they take the chemical plant, then they will be able to establish, in the same way that the Ukrainians from the top of that chemical plant have fire control over the surrounding area and roads, the Russians will then have fire control over those roads and be able to cut off all the supplies to Avdiivka, at least from the north here. They're working on cutting off the southern roads down south. So that is the situation. It's a bad situation. And the Russians are committed, apparently, to this effort. Now, there are some folks saying that that the Ukrainians are laying traps for the Russians here. That may be. I don't know that to be true. I think that the Ukrainians are responding to an evolving situation in a way that preserves Ukrainian lives as best they can. And what else can any of us do in the face of an insane onslaught like they're facing here? That's the latest on Avdiivka. We expect that large-scale attack to happen imminently, very likely this weekend. So happy Veterans Day to everybody. Thank you for your service, everybody that served or had family members serve. I also want to give a special shout out to Willow K64, who sponsored today's update on Avdiivka. Thank you, Willow.